Habiba Kahinde. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you. Thanks. It's really nice to see you guys again.
So without much ado, I want to welcome Camilla Nontra.
Yay!
Oh my goodness. I should come to you every day when I need.
Correct. This is Sudan.
Wow.
Sudan. Believe it or not, Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt.
Interesting.
Begin to think in a Pan-African way, because they now see that their conditions are not just about that local space, but the condition is linked to all of the other.
Hello. Good morning from California and good afternoon if you live where my co-host lives. If you live where our guest lives, also good morning. Welcome to the PanAfricana show. My name is Fred Nontra, co-host of the PanAfricana show. We start by thanking God for today. By Him we live, we move, and have our being. How you doing today, Jesse?
I'm doing well, man. I am so excited about this episode because I've learned so much in the past week, and I can't wait until our audience gets an opportunity to learn it as well. So I don't even want to waste time. Let's go ahead and introduce our guest. I'll let you introduce because this is somebody you found. Go ahead.
All right. So our guest is her name is Doctor.
Yes, doctor. Emphasis.
Dr. Abigail ESENAM Asangba. She's a postdoc. She's doing her postdoc at the prestigious Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. She's also had she had a PhD in in Chicago?
Yes, University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign.
University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And she's studying something that has not been studied much by people who look like us, and there's been underrepresentation in that field as far as research, and that had to do with maternal health. It also has to do with cervical cancer and endometrial cancer, which I never heard until recently, until I met her. So without much ado, I want to welcome the one and only Dr. Abby.
Thank you, Jesse and Fred. I'm excited to be here. A little nervous, but yeah, I'm super excited. So nice to meet you both and everyone else.
Well, I'm the one that's nervous because I've got to try to keep up. This is one of those episodes that I feel like it's information that everybody needs to know, but I didn't necessarily understand the impact, particularly on Black women. But before we even get into any of that, for the audience who's like, okay, well, we just want to know, Dr. Abby, where are you from? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm a Ghanaian by birth. So I'm from a small village called Alavanyo in the Volta region of Ghana. And so I lived my life in mostly in Accra. I got my undergrad from the University of Ghana, Legon. And then I came here for graduate school, where I did all my graduate study at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I ended up with 2 master's degrees and a PhD. Wow. And I currently live in Rochester, Minnesota as a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Surgery at Mayo Clinic. Yeah.
Salute to your academics, your credentials, everything. That's amazing. So if the audience is watching, it's always important for us if they're, we stream to Black people all around the world. So we want Black people all around the world to see folks who are actually doctors doing major research, doing major things, and understand that this is possible, right? Yeah. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start getting towards some of the science. First of all, what inspired you to even want to study science?
Wow. Okay. That I guess first of all, so my mom is a nurse and a midwife. So I grew up with medical stuff around me, basically. So like I said before, I was born in a small village called Alavanyo in the Volta region. So I lived with my mom there because she had moved to her village, which is where she comes from. So she was in charge at the clinic, the small clinic that was located in that village, right? So I literally grew up in like a medical village in a weird way. Our home was an extension of that clinic. A lot of the patients would come to our house and all of that. So I think right from the start, I've always been in that direction of medical or science related kind of field. But of course, my family, especially my mom, wanted me to be an MD. She really wanted me to go to medical school. But I always tell people that if there was going to be any person who got motivated to go into the medical sciences based on seeing stuff around them, that was going to be me. But unfortunately, what that did to me was basically tell me, no, this is not where I want to go. Because I remember even back then being a little girl, and just like when people come to the house who were seriously sick, I would just want to hide because I was really stressed, and I was like, oh my goodness, what if this person dies, right? So I've always had issues with people getting seriously sick, people getting injured, and I did not want to deal with death. It was just too much for me. But yeah, so through high school though, in Ghana, anyone who is a Ghanaian would know that usually in Ghana, you actually have a major right from high school. So I was a science major right from high school. So I did biology, chemistry, math, and what was the other one? Physics, right? So that was like the building blocks where I knew that my life was heading towards science. And then in college, when my undergrad, I was in a Greek science. And also there we had multiple sub fields of a Greek science, right? So I ended up focusing on animal science and economics. But I just really knew I was not a ceteris paribus person, all things being equal. I definitely wanted to handle things and wanted to understand the natural events of life, and that was biology. So I ended up majoring in animal science. And so that's kind of how it started. Or so I would say right from the start, I kind of knew I wanted to be either in the medical field or science-related field, right?
Very interesting.
So I mean, to jump off of that, what got you interested in this particular field in studying vaginal microbiome among Black women?
So that's really interesting and very personal. I mean, you know, when you are doing research, there's got to be a lot of things that motivate you, or whatever you do actually in life, whatever career or job you have, there's got to be something that pushes you forward. And for me, studying the vaginal microbiome in Black women especially is very personal, right? So like I said, when I got 2 master's degrees from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So my first master's degree was in animal science, but my concentration was mostly enzymology or some kind of biochemistry. I was trying to figure out how to use microbes. I'm going to try not to get too technical, but I was trying to understand how to use those little bags to break down plant biomass, right, to produce ethanol. I guess we all know that we can put some ethanol in your cars, like biofuel, right? So my research was actually funded by British Petroleum, BP. So that was sort of what I was doing at the beginning for my first master's degree. But along the way, I realized that in as much as I like studying the bags, what I was doing was focus like specifically on one bag and what enzyme they produce and how we can use that. But then I wanted to expand that to a more of a community-based thing. So that's how I transitioned from looking at just one specific bag to multiple bags. So just like the whole community, right? So my second degree was in geobiology, where I was trying to look at how we can use life on Earth as an analog to studying life on Mars. I understand that is so out there, but my research site was Yellowstone National Park. And if anyone has been there, you know there are a lot of hot springs, right? And so these hot springs, when the water comes out, they precipitate, right? They form those rocks, and some of these rocks, we believe that at the time they were forming, they could have trapped some water with them. And thus, hopefully, the water would have some of the microbes that were originally in those water bodies. And through time, we can be able to go in there and try to see whether we can identify these bags at all. So that's what I was doing. And this is important because we know there is a lot of carbonate or calcium carbonate rock deposits on Mars, right? So there were rocks that were brought back, those that people were trying to find out, was there life ever on Mars? Is there a way for us to be able to identify these? Are there any kind of signatures or biosignatures, right, that we can see from those rock samples? So we were using Yellowstone, these rocks that we call them travertine, which is just calcium carbonate deposits. Could we use these rocks to be able to understand what to look out for when we get the samples from Mars, right? So I love doing that. That definitely put me in trying to understand microbes that live in super, like we call them extremophiles. They live in really extreme environments like hot springs, salt water, and just things that you and I cannot survive in, right? And as much as I love that, I kept thinking, how would I be able to help Ghanaians if I ever go back to Ghana? We're still trying to figure out life on Earth, right? Would I really be able to contribute much to Ghana as a whole if I decide to stick with studying life on other planets right now? And I thought right now probably was not the best thing to do. So I wanted to move more to the medically related sciences where I can still use the same skills that I had already learned. So all of this, the study of microbes in any environment is what we call the microbiome, right? So if you take the human on your skin, any part of your body, literally from your head to toe, both externally and internally, you have bugs that live with you, right? And there is this joke we always make. No, it's actually not a joke, it's the truth that you have more microbial cells in your body than you have your own human cells. You know, we are multicellular organism and every tissue is made up of cells, right? And you have more microbial cells in your body than you have human cells. So it's like you literally live together with those microbes, whether you like them or not. And my old PhD advisor used to say that human beings are beautiful sacks of water filled with microbes. Because that's just like how essential they are in us, right? So when I started trying to understand the microbes in relation to health, I started working with this professor, and she was really interested in the vaginal microbiome. And so the vaginal microbiome, which is basically all the bugs that are found in the vagina of women, right? And so, or people call it the natural flora or fauna in the vaginal area, right? So she would say we have 5 different subtypes, is what we call them, communities or states of these microbes. And 4 of them are defined clearly by just the presence of one bug. These are called lactobacillus species. So species is like the lowest level of classification, right? So they define these communities based on the presence of one specific bug. But there is one community that is just everything else. We don't know exactly what is there. We don't understand it as much. All we know is that usually, especially in white women, when you have this specific microbes, which are just more heterogeneous group, you most likely are not healthy. It's something we call bacterial vaginosis, which is just an imbalance of your vaginal microbiome. It means that now, instead of having just one or few species of microbes, like lactobacillus, like I mentioned before, now you're going to have a whole bunch of other bugs that are present. But guess what? Naturally, for a lot of Black women, we have that kind of microbiome. And that does not mean that we are sick or not healthy or don't have a healthy vaginal microbiome. But as with most things, the model that was studied is usually white people, right? So when we start seeing differences, it becomes something like, this is not right. This is a deviation from what we've always known. And of course, our instinct is to classify that as not right. So for me, I was getting really angry reading papers that would always classify the Black vaginal microbiome as BV-like, bacterial vaginosis-like, which is a disease state, right? So what naturally is in us is being classified as disease-like, or at least it looks like what would be a disease state in other people, which is not right. And because of that, it's like, we have to be able to understand this community. This group 4 is what it is, community subtype 4. we need to understand what is in there. What is the role? Why do some people have those heterogeneous group of microbes naturally, even if they don't have bacterial vaginosis, right? So for me, it was very personal. I'm like, there's no one going to do this for us. This is something that Black people need to address themselves, because a lot of the research is done using white people. So what you're going to find is all this lactobacillus dominated microbiome, which is not what we find in Black people. So I guess it's a long story, but it's kind of how what drew me into trying to understand what the vaginal microbiome of Black women really is made of.
I am so glad that you explained that, because when I was reading, the first thing I thought, I was like, well, why are they saying this? And you know me, I'm quick to blame white people for stuff. So I was like, see, it's the impact of slavery and colonization. This has changed our DNA. But in actuality, you brought a very good point. It's just that we haven't been studied in this same kind of way, and we can't necessarily rely on their scientific systems to do it. So people like you are stepping up to the plate to do it essentially for the culture. So now you're a culture, on top of being a doctor, you are a culture warrior and a hero. Right.
Yeah. Okay, so we have somebody on who made a comment, one of our good friends. David says, please don't hold back on being technical. And then Jesse, David has been dodging us for a year plus, and he's the one who introduced us to.
You should get him on here.
Then he's saying, I think he's picking back to what you said about Yellowstone. Say any interesting outcomes, discoveries from your research at Yellowstone.
Yeah, that's been a while ago. So what I did back then, which I didn't push it, I think that lab is probably doing stuff. So what I did then was look at rocks that were about 1 million years old. We also got some of these similar rocks from somewhere in Turkey, also pretty similar formations. And we were definitely able to identify some bugs that were there, right? So there were some microbes that were trapped in these rocks. And so, but the question is always whether these are contamination, because these rocks have been sitting out for so long. There's been different elements of weather that could influence what's in there. But like what I said before, what we call the fluid inclusion, we believe that fluid inclusion was trapped at the time of formation. So if there is no evidence of contamination during that over the years, then we believe that what we have is actually real. So basically, like I said, what we're doing was just using those deposits as analogs, right? So, I mean, of course, the rocks that we get from Mars obviously are years and years old, billions of years old. So if we have a rock on Earth that is like 1 million years old, the question is, how far back can we be able to still be able to recover microbial signature in the rock? So we're still able to recover them. But I did not pursue it to be able to conclusively say these are not as a result of contamination over the years, but there were definitely bugs in those rocks.
So I'm curious, as far as like Earth and Mars, are the microbes similar, or was there any comparison as to what's there?
No, so that's the thing. There's not been any life that has been recovered from Mars yet, right? There was a time, there was this meteorite that was brought back years and years ago that had like just some kind of signature. So that's one of the things, because we don't know what to look out for. We don't even know, even on Earth, like if there is a bug that has been trapped for millions of years, how would they even look like? That's why you sort of need a starting point, or you need a baseline, right, to be able to compare all these findings to, which is why a lot of these projects look at life in really extreme environments to try to see whether we can have a baseline to be able to do those comparisons, right? Yeah, so as of now, not really, I can't say, I haven't been keeping up with the astrobiology world in a while, but I don't think there's been any kind of discovery from like microbial life from Mars yet.
Gotcha. Okay. So we were talking a little bit before about kind of the impact of this. Oh, I'm sorry, Fred.
Oh yeah, I didn't realize I'd muted myself. But,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna switch gears. Tell us more about the atopium vaginae.
Atopobium. Okay.
Atopobium.
Atopobium.
Atopobium. Yes.
Trust me, even we struggle with those names, and we always ask who names these bugs at all. They're just like the most ridiculous names we can think of. But yeah, so that study is a very important one. If you were to look into so we're talking about the vaginal microbiome, right? And so what Fred is asking of is the bug that was discovered to potentially predict the occurrence of preterm birth. So preterm birth is birth before 37 weeks of gestation, right? So if a woman delivers anything between, I think I think just about a few weeks ago, this kid actually was named the youngest preemie to ever survive. I think he was born at 21 weeks. It was him and his sister, but I think the sister ended up dying. But he's now like 14. I think he's over a year old, but he was born at 21 weeks. So that's like a big problem, right? Preterm birth, and I could probably talk about that before linking it to atopobium, but vaginal preterm birth is, like I said, birth before 37 weeks of gestation. And I think actually in the US, it might be before 38 weeks. I'm not exactly sure. People define it slightly different, but the World Health Organization defines it as birth before 37 weeks of full gestation. So what that means is you're going to have a baby who has lower birth weight than normal, and a lot of things could happen, right? And so, as with a lot of unfortunate things, majority of it happens in sub-Saharan Africa, and also and this one also in like Southern Asia. So the numbers are incredibly high, especially the percentage. So one of the papers also talk about the numbers in Nigeria.
Yes.
So yeah, and that was incredibly high. I think there was even an update where right now Nigeria has like the second highest, right? The second highest. So those are like absolute numbers. But what is even more alarming is the percentage. So the reason the numbers in Nigeria will be more alarming than Ghana is because Nigeria's population is so much higher, right?
Yeah.
So obviously they're having more kids compared to Ghana. But if you look at the percentage or preterm birth rate, Nigeria is actually about 11.6%. Ghana is about 12.5%. So you can see that the percentage of preterm birth is actually higher in Ghana compared to Nigeria. But of course, the absolute numbers, when it comes down to it, there'll be a lot more kids born preterm in Nigeria compared to Ghana. So a lot of sub-Saharan African countries lie in that range of between 10 to 15. There are a few who are even about 15%. So this boils down to like, and so if your population is high, then the absolute numbers are going to be incredibly high. So this is problematic. So of course, there's been a lot of studies, or people have tried to understand why women have babies preterm. What could be the reason? Of course, it could be stress, it could be socioeconomic problems, it could be your cultural practices, and a lot of other things, right? So where I come in, or where our research comes in, is we are trying to understand what the role of infections are. Because if you think about preterm birth, there are two general or two broad categories, right? You can have the provider decide that you are at risk, so you should deliver before you're fully due. But majority of them are also spontaneous. It just happens. The woman is in labor without actually being fully due for birth. So in that case, we call it idiopathic. There's just basically no explanation for it, right? So one of we think that uterine infections that women have from their vaginal, just reproductive tract, lower reproductive tract infections could be it. So that's where we come in, because I study bugs, right? I study microbes that are in and around your body, on your body. So what we are trying to understand is, what is the role of the bugs that are in your vaginal area when you're pregnant? What role do they play in helping you carry pregnancy full term versus delivering before you actually due, right? So the work that was done in Nigeria, like I said, is one of the most incredible data sets we have in this field, because not a lot of work has been done on Africa. And I mean, not just Africa, but even Black women in general. So Martina, who is a colleague here, she's now a postdoc at the Twin Cities, University of Minnesota, St. Paul, and she collected samples from pregnant women right from, I think, about 16 weeks of pregnancy all the way till they delivered, and a few weeks after they delivered too. So this was a longitudinal kind of study. And she also collected hormones, blood samples to look at their stress hormones during pregnancy. So long and short of the story is at the trimester, which is just like the last stage of your pregnancy, mid-trimester, the study was able to identify that this specific microbe, which is called Atopobium vaginae, which has been shown to be involved in things like bacterial vaginosis and other unhealthy vaginal situations, can potentially predict whether a woman can carry pregnancy full term or can or deliver preterm. So that's basically what that study is looking at, right? So that's what we do. We're trying to look at associations and associations between the bugs that we find and the outcomes of pregnancy. I hope that answers Fred's question, even though he disappeared.
He did disappear. I'm curious about that though, because I know we also are kind of walking into territory that hasn't been extensively explored yet when we're talking about the bodies of Black women. And so what I'm curious about is, are we at a position now where we're linking the two together to say that if there's this increased presence, then there's a greater propensity for a preterm birth? Or are we still saying, yeah, but we don't really know Black women's, was it microbiome?
Microbiome.
Microbiome, yes. Are we saying we don't know it yet, and we're just thinking that maybe there's a correlation?
Well, yeah, so right now it's just correlation. Microbiome is a really tricky field because it's really hard to say this is the cause and this is the effect, right? Okay. You have a specific microbial community, what we call them, or the microbiome, which is basically the bugs that are there, everything they produce, their genetic material and everything, right? So you have a specific microbiome and you have a specific condition that you are trying to see. So there's like A and B. Now the question is, did A produce B? Or was B as a result of A? You know, it's just like cause and effect. It's kind of hard to tease them apart. All we know, or at least from this study, Martina's study, is that women, a lot more, there's significant levels of Atopobium vaginae in the vaginal microbiome of women who ended up having kids preterm, right? So right now, all we can say is there's that correlation, but there's not been any like in vivo or things like mouse model or using animal models or any kind of thing like that to study to see, oh, if this mouse is pregnant and we inject we feed it with Atopobium vaginae, would this mouse deliver preterm or not, something like that, right? So we haven't done that yet. So right now it is just a correlation.
Okay. Stephanie has a comment here. She says, in Texas, a special task force has been established to study the higher rates of maternal mortality, etc., in African American women. I was preterm and one of my children preterm. History of issues in my family.
So yeah, that's so you were asking me why I got into studying the vaginal microbiome. So that was something I had decided to do, but I could study vaginal microbiome in relation to a lot of other things, which I would hopefully eventually do. But one of the first ones that I wanted to address was, or look at was the preterm birth, right? My mom was born preterm. My big sister, when she was her first pregnancy at 28 weeks, she had what we call preeclampsia. So there's a lot to talk about, but preeclampsia is basically a pregnancy disorder where women, I think about after 20 months or 20 weeks of pregnancy, they develop high blood pressure. So they have just those disorders, and that can lead to preterm baby delivery. So she had preeclampsia at 28 weeks, and unfortunately, she ended up losing that baby. So she had stillbirth. I guess that baby, I'm sure that baby could have been born if it was probably in a different place or something, because like I said, the people have been born even with lower number of weeks of gestation than 28 weeks, right? But that's another problem when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa. We don't have the resources to deal with these kind of things, right? We don't have the resources to efficiently deal with the messiness of having a kid who is born preterm, or even the aftercare and all of that. But anyway, coming back to her question, where she was talking about the fact that family history is an issue, right? So like my sister, after that, her third child, at 37 weeks, she went into preterm labor again. And fortunately for that baby, she was able to have that baby, she's alive, right? A live birth. But so that tells you that obviously there are so many risk factors. Obviously, genetic makeup, your genetic information, your family history is definitely one of them. Mm-hmm. Women who are obese when they're pregnant, obesity is one of that has been found to be a risk factor. Preeclampsia, like I said, is a risk factor. Diabetes is a risk factor. And one of the things that I found very interesting is like, and this is specific to Ghana, it's the use of solid fuel, charcoal and firewood. Apparently, especially if you use it in indoor settings. So that was actually really interesting, which is one of the reasons why we cannot be dependent on research from other areas to use for what we want to understand about ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. Because are there people even in the US who use charcoal indoors for cooking or firewood? Probably in some really remote woods, I don't know, somewhere. But this is not a risk factor that you likely find in the US. Someone who uses solid fuel, it was probably not going to be a risk factor because it's probably not done, right? But these are things that are specific to specific regions. So you have risk factors that are specific to specific regions. That's why we need to be able to include data from all over the place and stop depending on what some other people have found, because it's not one size fits all kind of thing, right? So yeah, your family history definitely does matter. If you've had a preterm baby before, there's a high likelihood you could. Even if your mom or your sister or someone did, there's a high likelihood that you could as well.
So that's a very interesting statement, only because I think about these things kind of comparatively, right? In the United States, I think one of the things that we tend to see is we say, well, it's a history of doctors who don't necessarily value Black women and their pain or anything that Black women are going through. Mm-hmm. And now we know, who haven't studied the work or the makeup of anything that is going on with Black women. But then when you expand it and you look at a more international level, you see that there's a myriad of different factors that can go into this. And I'm curious, do you think that if Ghana was able to secure the resources that they need in order to be able to have, I guess, like a system, I don't want to say a system of healthcare like America, because we got issues, a better system of healthcare than what we have, right? Do you think that just through the I guess the genome of the people and the practices of the people, as far as, you know, what you were mentioning with cooking and everything, do you think those numbers would tailor off and we would have more people who are delivering at a regular term, or do you think it's too hard to say?
So that's a really interesting question and really good one. Here's the thing. You know, the US is actually the only developed country that has preterm birth rates more than 10. And guess what the reason is? What do you think is the reason? Who do you think makes more contribution to that high preterm birth rate that is recorded in the US?
Yeah.
Which group of people?
Us.
Black people, Black women,
yes.
Right? So that's a really interesting question when you're talking. So that's one of the things that really fascinates me as someone who's trying to understand the microbiome, the role of genetics, right? Because we see this happening in a lot of African countries. It could be any number of reasons, but the problem is the reason why it's a big problem is, like I said, a lot of them are idiopathic, which means there is no cause. We don't even know what happens. Someone just spontaneously goes preterm labor. There's like no cause for it, right? So that's when we start asking questions. Has this got anything to do with your genetic makeup? Which is why it's interesting to be able to compare Black women in Africa to Black women here, right? Who African Americans here, because now you're thinking, okay, even African Americans here are experiencing something similar to what African women in Africa are experiencing. Has this got something to do with your genetic makeup? Or is it that even if you're Black, even if you're in the US and because you're a Black person, you don't have access to all of the resources that other women have which is also part of it, right? I think one of the things which we'll talk about later, if the question comes up, when we're talking about endometrial cancer and ovarian cancer, these two cancers actually, they are one of those two of those cancers that the incidence rate is higher in white women. But guess which group of women don't have a high 5-year survival rate? Black women. So it's insane that we are not getting infected as much, or we are not getting those cancers as much, but we die from it more than white people, because at the end of the day, it comes back to what's your access to healthcare,
Adequate healthcare.
All of that, right? So it's a good question. Would things change if we improve the resources we currently have in sub-Saharan Africa? Maybe. But then also the question also happens, it should also ask ourselves, what else? There's a lot of underlying reasons. And that's where your microbiome is one of the ones that I am trying to understand if that plays a role. Because if your vaginal microbiome, regardless of whether you are healthy, rich, poor, is going to make you not be able to carry pregnancy full term, then it doesn't matter where you are located, what kind of resources you have. We need to know if you have Atopobium vaginae versus if you have Lactobacillus iners, who is going to do better. And if I need Lactobacillus iners to be able to carry pregnancy full term, then there has to be a way to make that happen versus keeping with Atopobium vaginae that I currently have, right? So it's sort of all hands on deck kind of thing. We have to look at the socioeconomic resources that we have, lifestyle choices. A lot of things come together, but you just have to tackle this problem from all around the place, right? Basically.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, so then since you mentioned it, let's get into it. Tell us about the endometrial cancer. I hadn't heard about it again until I met you. And then, all right.
So another aspect of our lab we look at is the gynecological cancers, right? So endometrial cancer and ovarian cancer, it's basically, so the endometrial cancer is just overgrowth of cells, which is what every cancer is. But this is in the mucous lining of the uterus, which is basically your womb, right? So just the location, versus the ovarian cancer, which is in your ovaries. At least that's where they originate. So that's the main difference. But the endometrial cancer is mostly diagnosed in older women, so postmenopausal and menopausal women, and also women who most likely also have are obese. Obesity is also, as you can see, I think in almost everything, obesity plays a pretty big role as a risk factor in a lot of diseases. So obesity is one of them. Old age, and also women who have had a lot of exposure to estrogen, which is one of the sex hormones in women, especially if they've had like hormone therapy, hormone replacement therapy, and all of that. So yeah, that's basically what endometrial cancer is.
Okay, before we move on, let's get to, I forgot about Stephanie here. She says, I have great access to healthcare. It is thought that African Americans are denied adequate care, even if they have access. Example, Serena Williams. And then she says, fibroids are issues in African American women. Is it common in sub-Saharan Africa?
It's kind of hard for me to talk about the statistics of that, but I know that just fibroids is actually something that is apparently very common. Like 80% or so of women of reproductive age, childbearing age, actually have fibroids. So it all comes down to the size of the tumors, and also where they are located. So there are some women who never find out that they have fibroid, and usually naturally by the time you get to your menopause and postmenopausal state, it goes away naturally. So these fibroids are basically benign tumors, right, in your uterine, in your uterus, right? So like I said, it's found in a lot of women, and a lot of women never had the care, any reason to go even try to find out, unless something else happens and you do like a transvaginal ultrasound or something else where they're able to discover that you actually have fibroids. But definitely there are women who've had fibroids that have especially interfered with pregnancy. I actually have a friend whose wife has had multiple miscarriages. And the last one that she just had recently, it was diagnosed that she actually has fibroids. So she has to undergo surgery to be able to get those tumors out. So sometimes when they are too large, they can interfere with pregnancy, they can interfere with other things. But otherwise, like I said, I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are, but generally, a lot of women, whether black, white, wherever you find yourself, just naturally end up with fibroids, which go away naturally eventually.
Okay. And then this got me curious because PCR with of course with the COVID-19 and all that. And I read in one of the papers you gave us, it said targeted qPCR to detect among because some people tend to contract the endometrial cancer. They are asymptomatic. Can you please comment on that?
Yeah, so qPCR is PCR is basically it's polymerase chain reaction, right? This is a way to amplify whatever gene that you are interested in. So when we talk about targeted, it means that you have what we call primers. It's like, what is the easiest way? It's like you're reading a sentence in a book. You know the beginning word of that sentence, you know the ending word of that sentence. So somehow you can use those two words to be able to make that sentence complete in a weird way, right? So the person, I guess maybe you can think of it as crossword puzzles where they can give you a clue or just the beginning letter and you can be able to put it together, right? So you can make primers that can target specific genes. So what we did in this study, this was done just before I came to the lab. So just a little bit of background. So we talk about endometrial cancer. Our lab was able to discover. So, at the end of, I feel like to bring this home, to make this something that is tangible to a lot of people, I think the gold standard is cervical cancer. So cervical cancer, you can get a pap smear if you're a woman of a certain age every 3 or 5 years, right? And they can look at the cells that are present and tell you whether or not you are at risk. And what we look out for is, we know that cervical cancer is caused by what we call the human papillomavirus, or HPV. And so the specific microbiome can make those HPV feel happy and be there or not. And we know it's also sexually transmitted and all that. But what I'm trying to say is that the gold standard for trying to link the microbes to specific diseases is to be able to come up with specific microbes that we can actually try to identify and link them strongly to the presence or the occurrence of these different diseases, right? So that's what we've been able to do with a cervical cancer, where we have HPV that you can look for. Another one, I think, is Helicobacter pylori and gastric cancer. It's another bag, and also another cancer. So that's sort of the gold standard, or what we aim to do. So our lab was able to identify this specific microbe we called Porphyromonas somre. And so PSOM, we were able to identify that we have significant levels, significantly higher levels of this specific bag in women who have endometrial cancer compared to women who have other benign tumors, right? So another thing with those studies is that it's kind of hard to do healthy versus cancer person, because the only way for us to actually be able to get these samples is if the person does what we call hysterectomy. You're literally removing their womb and everything. And no healthy woman is going to get rid of their ovaries, their womb, and all of that. So it has to be that the person has some other benign, but not cancerous tumor or condition that requires that they do or they undergo hysterectomy, right? So we're able to identify that this specific bag is significantly higher in women who have endometrial cancer. So to be able to, so the way this works is when we get the sequences back. So think of it as, like I said, sequences are like a book. Your whole genetic makeup is a whole book, and you have like letters, GCT. You have letters that make up the different words in the book, right? So when we get those words back, that whole book back, we need to read it to understand what is there. Now there's a database that you can compare whatever you get back to see whether this is present or not. So if my sequences read A, B, D, and Z, I have to be able to compare this to that database to make sure that, this is bag A versus bag B. But sometimes you don't get 100% match. It could be like 90%, 99%, but that basically could tell you that there could actually be different species. So the best way to confirm this is to try to do qPCR, where you look for specific bag, right? So they take the samples from these people and target those 2 bags that they were interested in and try to do qPCR to make sure that, yes, what we found in the sequencing results, it's really present in these people, in the samples from these people. So they take the vaginal swabs and they target those specific bags using qPCR, which is basically quantitative polymerase chain reaction. So now when you're in the process of amplifying that specific gene, you're also quantifying it. That's where the quantitative part comes in. So that's what they do to look at the numbers in patients with EC, endometrial cancer, versus not. And they see that, yes, significantly higher levels of Pemphigomonas summary are in those patients compared to those who don't have EC. Complicated.
Well, I want to tell you this. First off, and Fred has heard this story before. I started off this journey of life in a lab. I thought I was going to be a science kid. So
nice.
PCR, I'm familiar with. I've done the pipetting for that. And I also think that there was, what was the other thing? Something called gel electrophoresis.
Electrophoresis?
Yes. Where it would be like Jello, but somewhere in there they would tell me the piece that I cut out had DNA sequences that I could then like put a chemical in and melt off the gel and freeze the DNA, right? So I don't know what it is, but I felt connected when you talked about
Yeah, I'm glad.
So to the people watching in the audience, like for people who are interested in science and who may not necessarily know or have seen these things, there's a whole world of cool stuff that is happening in labs and has been happening for quite some time with folks doing things like using DNA, like what Dr. Abby was talking about, using DNA to identify what's going on. And they keep like journals and records of what all of these different, I mean, some people put them in plasmids so they can test like drugs and stuff like that. But there's a record out here. And so if you are, some people think about making, CDs, tapes, albums, making songs. No, make a plasmid. Like make something like that. Put it in a record, put your name on it, right? And it'll go. And maybe you whatever you create or whatever you test might be the cure to one of these things we're talking about. The last thing I want to say is anytime that we talk about women's health, particularly because, I know the audience is looking like there's 2 men on here, right? So what do y'all know? When we talk about women's health, one of the concerns that we should all have is that we don't want women suffering by themselves and not having somebody to reach out to or talk to. So even if you are a man and you don't necessarily understand all the terminology or what's going on, it is important that people get screenings so that they can understand what is going on with their body. It is important for you to be able to be supportive and to understand, especially when we're talking about preterm births and all that. These hospitals, I don't want to get too real, but you're going to have to check some of these doctors at the hospital because sometimes they want to do stuff that they shouldn't do. And they know that sometimes your lady will be out of commission or not necessarily in her right mind because she's dealing with pain, or she might be, it might have had like different pharmaceutical drugs, whatever. And they take advantage of you being ignorant, right? So it's important for you to know this stuff and to be able to be there for your woman when she needs you, or somebody in your family if they need you. And that's my
Absolutely.
I'm getting off my soapbox.
So, Habiba, hi Habiba. Habiba laughed at your and then
and I think Stephanie is just asking a question.
Yeah, so how can we motivate Black people everywhere to participate in more studies?
Oh man, that is an absolutely brilliant question and a multi-million one. The thing is, so first of all, where at Mayo Clinic, I already said I was in the Department of Surgery. I'm also in the Center for Individualized Medicine. And basically what that comes to is right now, we are trying to live in a world where we tailor treatments to individuals, right? You're not going to tell you go take an leave just because you have a headache, and those individuals will take an leave. Like, we are trying to understand the role of your microbes the role of your genetic makeup, the role of your lifestyle choices, and everything about you as an individual, right? How does that interact with the drugs you take? You'll be surprised to know that the drugs we take, a lot of them, the bugs that are in our bodies play important roles in whether or not these drugs work. Sometimes you even need these bugs to activate these drugs, right? So where am I getting to with all of this? I think I was telling Fred the first time we spoke that my paper that I'm working on right now that hopefully comes out soon, and I'll let you guys read it. It's ovarian cancer, right? And I work at Mayo Clinic. Guess what? Out of the 64 individuals in that paper, there's not a single one of them that is Black. 63 of them are white and 1 Chinese. And at the end of the day, I'm excited to be able to discover something that could help women to identify or to hopefully help them, because we are talking about endometrial cancer. Ovarian cancer is worse because ovarian cancer is actually called a silent killer, because you're not even going to know you have it until it's at the last stages. And when you do, there's literally nothing to do. It's not like cervical cancer where you can get some kind of screen done or you can get a pap smear. There's no screening available, which is why we are trying right now to see is there any microbe, any biosignature, any biomarker that we can be able to use to identify anyone who is susceptible, or even hopefully identify it early during the early stages. Because if you do, then your ability to survive, that 5-year survival rate goes up the roof, versus if you wait till it's stage 3 or 4, right? So I'm excited and I'm doing this and I'm praying that God help me to identify some microbe that can be helpful. But at the end of the day, what if this is not even helpful for people who look like me? Because we are not included in the data. And this is a very, it's sort of a unique problem when it comes to Mayo, because if you know Mayo Clinic, first of all, it's a little bit more on the expensive side compared to other hospitals. Yeah. The community itself is more wide than anything else. So hopefully, I'm hoping that other hospitals have Black communities, and when there is any kind of, when there are studies like this, hopefully Black women will be included. But the problem, Mayo is like one of those places that is a nice pipeline of physicians working with researchers, right? You go right to the clinical side, collect your samples, bring them to your lab, and you work on them. So there's a lot of collaboration between the physicians and the scientists. So this is like one of the best places in the world to be able to carry out this kind of researches. But unfortunately, if we don't have people that, like, if the data doesn't represent every color or every race, then what is the point? So how do we motivate people? This is very personal. You want to be and like I was talking about Center for Individualized Medicine, where right now everything is about big data, garbage in, garbage out. If you're trying to use AI, machine learning, whatever, to develop ways to be able to diagnose people, and these machines are trying to, you're using all this technology. Whatever you feed in is what it's going to use as its training data. So if there's no data from people like us, then at the end of the day, you're going to have all the technologies, all the advancement in every field, but then how would we be able to help ourselves? So for me, I know that Black people have been, have found themselves in situations where there's a lot of mistrust. People have used them, scientists have used them, and that's exactly the word, use them, right? And unfortunately, it's put at places that we don't trust, and we are not willing to take this risk. But I hope that we get to a point where we know, and we, of course, the scientists, we have to do better. You can't just go to a community, collect data and leave and never come back, or even tell the people what's the reason why you're collecting the samples. How is it going to help them? But if I go to Ghana right now and I meet pregnant women and I tell them this is what I want to do, and this is why I'm doing it, I need to be able to understand whether I can help women to be able to be prepared through their, this is tangible result, outcome that they know that they can look forward to. So it's a lot of work, but I feel like for Black people, I think we need to realize that we are at a point in our lives in this world where we need to be represented. We need to count. We cannot, how I tell people, the first time I learned about the vaginal microbiome, I think I was like in high school, where all I knew was that your vaginal microbiome had to be dominated by lactobacillus species, and the pH had to be like 4 point something, and it had to be acidic, and that's all I have known. And so I started right now with research and people trying to include more Black people and people from other races. We realized that it's more of a spectrum, right? Than it's either lactobacillus dominant or bacterial vaginosis. And we are just put in all Black women. And so even when people go to the hospital before, they do this kind of test where they measure how many microbes you have. And if the scale, if it's high number, it means that you have a lot of microbes, which is more heterogeneous group. So you are classified as bacterial vaginosis, which is not right. You have to actually, and because there are some people who naturally have more heterogeneous group of microbes versus other people. But all of these tests were based on studies that were based on white women. And so it's not helpful for Black women. So like, I don't know. I think we just need to understand that we need to be present. And we don't have a good history with scientists. We don't have a lot of trust for them, but we need to be represented. Our data needs to be in there for it to count. Because I was actually talking to a friend from Ghana, not talking to a friend, I listened to a talk from Ghana about COVID, right? And according to what reports they currently have, he was talking about how the antibodies that they were getting out of patients who have been vaccinated at the time, it was not as high as they would have expected. And he brought it down to the fact that a lot of vaccines and these things at the end of the day, when they are brought down to Africa, the efficacy is not as high as was seen in the people that were used for the study, because a lot of the time we are not the training group, right? The data is trained on someone else. The vaccines are trained on someone else, but we expect that they work the same way. Unfortunately, not a lot of things work that way, right? And so it's all very complicated. We need to be involved. You need to be involved for it to count. I guess it's the very long answer to that question. I don't know.
That was good.
Habiba agrees with you. Says it's important to create awareness and spread knowledge of these medical issues. And then Stephanie says, please link me up. I will sign up and I'll put you in touch with the leadership of National Council of Negro Women. This is an emergency.
Awesome. Okay.
Absolutely.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, John. Yeah. So I did have a question just about what you just said, right? How do you balance being a Black woman who understands the history of science and scientific treatment and experimentation on Black people with also being a scientist?
A scientist. That's have I? Wow. Yeah. That's how do I balance that? Have I actually considered that before? I don't know. How do I balance that? Well, I guess in a way, I just hope that if I go to a Black community, they see me as a Black person who will come first versus seeing me as a researcher. So that's why, like, you go to the community and people that know you, people that you know, right? So hopefully they see you as that Black woman first before you become the researcher in front of them. But I guess it's still a difficult task, but I'm hoping that will make it a little easier. I mean, I'm still in that part of my development or my career where I haven't officially been out there yet, trying to solicit samples and try to talk to the people. I just got out of grad school in my postdoc, so I honestly don't know how it's going to be, but I hope that I'm able to overcome whatever the difficulties are in trying to get women. And like I said, if it's a personal story, if you can relate to the people, if you tell them this is what the reason why, it's not like, oh, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help us. I'm involved in this. I'm with this with you, right? Not just like me being some charity person trying to help you. This is for all of us, really. So I don't know.
So what I hear you saying is we need to get some funds together for a center for Dr. Abby, so we can trust her research and her studies, because we can't trust everybody else. It's the Mayo Clinic, not the hot sauce clinic. We need a hot sauce clinic.
Well, Stephanie has volunteered, so we'll hold her feet to the fire.
Yes.
we'll give you Stephanie's contact so you can stay in touch
That'll
with
be
her.
great.
So, yeah,
That'll be great.
to the National Council of Negro Women, and
That's awesome.
I think that would be a great way. All right. Well, you answered most of my questions, and
Okay.
well, it's been an hour already.
Oh man,
Yeah.
that went by quickly.
Yes. So if you haven't done so already, please like our Facebook page, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Instagram at the PanAfricana presents Afriscope. And then you can also get one of our T-shirts here, which is on Spreadshirt. I'll share the link shortly. Once you do that, you'll be also supporting the community.
Absolutely. And if you are interested in being a guest and sitting where Dr. Abby is sitting, then please reach out to us. Let us know. We want to make sure that we're connecting Black people all around the world so we can celebrate our achievements and also kind of know what's going on in your local area. So what we want to do now is we want to give Dr. Abby the opportunity to provide her social media contact. But before we do that, we say this every week, okay? This is not the time to be Steph Curry from half court shooting shots, okay? This is for serious inquiries only, okay?
She's a married woman too.
Yes, and she's a married woman, so her husband will find you, and we're gonna make sure he can track you down and dox you and all that stuff. So we just want to be clear. But Dr. Abby, if you don't mind sharing your best way for people to reach you on social media if they want to have you talk about your research.
That's so should I just put this on the comments? How do I
you can put it in the what do you call it, in the private comment,
and we can
I'll
share.
copy and paste
there we
it.
go. Okay.
Stephanie says, hell yeah.
What would be the best way? What would be the best way? I feel like
Instagram.
Maybe Twitter. So I actually have like two Twitter handles, where one is for my regular everyday life and one is for academic. My Facebook is very regular, normal wise, but I guess you can. So Twitter will probably be better.
Okay, sure.
Just give us whatever you're comfortable with.
I need to remember.
You might gotta see your kids and all that stuff. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, so this would be Abigail.
That's how come David actually asked the question. How can we follow Dr. Asangba?
Yeah, I know. Okay, and then maybe.
Okay, I got it.
Well, that's Twitter.
That's Twitter. Okay.
Yeah, that's Twitter. And then I guess, I think Twitter is fine. I feel like Facebook. The reason why I don't want to put Facebook is just because unless the person sends me a message, like I have a lot of friends on Facebook, and I just at this point I completely ignore friend requests and all of that. I feel like if anyone try to contact me through there, I'll probably not be responsive, and especially if I don't have any friends in common with them, and it's just some random name. I'm like, I don't know this person.
That's a troll.
I think I think Twitter is good. Yeah, that should be work.
Okay, so this is it at Abigail Asangba.
Yes.
At Abigail Asangba, and again, for professional.
Yes.
It's only professional, and you don't want Abby's husband putting on his. I will find you, and when I find you,
I'll let you know.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I've learned so much, and I'm hoping that the listening audience has been able to learn something from this. If nothing else, one, I think you've inspired somebody today to go into science that wasn't thinking about it before. Number two, I think you've told us the importance of making sure that we do these studies with trusted scientists like you. Make sure we do some of these studies so that we can get some of our information into the mapping of these things so we can start preparing for how we cure some of these issues affecting us. And number three, just showing us like you can be educated, smart, brilliant, and still be cool and still be receptive, all that stuff. Because people aren't always understanding that that's a possibility. So I thank you for your time and your intellect and all of this. And hopefully this is not the last time that we hear from you. At this point, I feel like you are probably our science expert. So if there's something else that comes out about women's health, I know I'm sending a message.
Okay, so Abby says thank you. Yes, thank you. And then
yes.
Thank you so much for having me. I was telling David, God, I'm really nervous because I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to get too technical, and I wasn't sure how I was going to deal with this, but it's been really interesting and fun just to have these conversations with you guys. They are really important conversations that need to be had, and we need to be a part. Our data needs to be out there. Like every joke and everything else aside, we need to be there. And
absolutely,
I can emphasize that enough. We need to be part of the conversation everywhere. So I'm glad I was able to be with you guys today.
Sure. All right. Yeah, Jonathan said exactly. So don't sign off yet. When we get off air, we have of course we have to share Stephanie's info with you. So you can
please.
And then also
I think
down
her email.
All right. So thanks for joining us, everyone. So what? David again. Is it Fred? Will Dr. Summer be back in a year or so to provide updates?
Fingers crossed. I hope so.
Yes, we'll definitely be welcome here with open arms.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Huge family now. So
yeah,
at this point, it's just going to be a message saying
the bigger question is, when are you coming on?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a very brilliant mind too. Mr. David Grant, he's okay, I'm not gonna give him up now. I know he's gonna crucify me.
Pressure.
He needs to be here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay. All right. So bye everyone. Have a blessed day.
Have a good week.
Bye.